For the third year and counting, Richard Skipper has been celebrating the artists you love.
And what are some of the things that you've really run out of time? And we've got to talk about your latest. I want to go back a little bit, first of all, and celebrate a true legend.
Richard Skipper is all about celebrating life, art, and his guest body of work.
And did you pursue performing opportunities while you were in high school?
Please join us while he showcases these diverse and talented individuals. Here's Richard Skipper.
Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. What are you celebrating tonight? Well, I'm celebrating the movies. And I want to explain why I'm wearing this tonight. Several years ago, I won a contest on TCM Backlot. And I was invited out to California, to Hollywood, to introduce Jezebel on the red carpet at Grauman's Chinese Theater. I've always loved the movies. I also want to share a little story with all of you before I bring our very special guest on tonight. When I was 13 years old, I auditioned for my first show. That show was, well, I'm actually going to bring him on while I talk about this. The first show, hello, John, how are you?
Hey, Richard, good to see you.
So I'm going to share this story because I think it's very apropos of this incredible book that you've written. When I was 13 years old, I went to audition at the Theater of the Republic in Conway, South Carolina. They were doing MAME. And I auditioned, and it was the worst audition in the history of auditions. I did not get cast. But that didn't deter me. I showed up at the first rehearsal anyway, and they gave me a walk-on. I had two lines at the show. Signed here and only 13. Those were my two lines. I worked on those two lines as if I was given the role of Patrick Dennis. And night after night after night, I came out, said those lines as proudly as if I had the biggest role in the show.
Sure.
And that, to me, is the theme of this book.
That's right.
There are no small parts. And when you first told me about this book, before I got it, I thought I was going to be reading about actors and actresses who had small parts in movies. Little did I know what I was going to delve into. But kudos to you, because this book is not only talks about these incredible roles that we're going to delve into tonight, but you give the history of who these people are and why these roles are very important as far as our cinematic history. So thank you and congratulations.
Well, thank you very much for what you just said. I appreciate it.
So I want to go back and talk. Well, before we start, this is Richard Skipper Celebrates. Your book is coming out on February 22nd. And anyone who leaves a comment tonight, ask a question, anyone, they don't even have to put the hashtag in. They're going to be entered to win a copy of this book tonight. So join in the celebration tonight, and they are automatically entered. That's how we're going to do this. So what else are you celebrating at this time besides the fact that you've completed your 7th book? It is 7, isn't it?
It is number 7. You are correct.
Lucky number 7.
Yeah, actually, I have two things going on at the same time. This book is coming out just as I've begun hosting a weekly classic film series where I live here in Milford, Pennsylvania, in a beautiful refurbished historic theater. So every Sunday at 4 o'clock, I come out, introduce a movie. We all watch it in all its glory on the big screen, and then I come back for a Q&A. So it's kind of a real sort of dream gig once a week, while during the week I'm getting all ready for this book to come out and setting up things like talking to you.
Well, thank you for being here. Now, I asked for a photograph of you as a 5-year-old, and you went a little further back than a 5-year-old. The reason I asked for a 5-year-old photograph, because to me, the 5-year-old self is the purest self. That's the self before life gets laid upon you before teachers and other students in school start telling you who you should be. I love this photograph because it's with your father. And
Mhm.
here it is. There you are. And obviously, you haven't changed a bit. I love the bow tie. I love the suit. You and I are, I think, the same age. And I had a suit like this as well. So
Okay.
tell us a little bit about this picture.
Well, it's I'm blowing out the candles of I think it's probably third birthday. I'm terrible with kids' ages, but it's could be two, I guess, even, but maybe three. And that's when we lived in Queens, and that probably was in the basement apartment that my grandparents lived in below us.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just had a dream about that house this week, oddly enough. I just connected that right this minute. But yeah, that was yeah, good times being a New York and then Long Island kid. Sure.
Now, one thing I love to do is someone gave me this incredible game called Be Best. And there's an icebreaker game. And
Uh,
this is my icebreaker question tonight. I haven't looked at it, so
oh,
I don't know what I'm going to ask you. And the icebreaker question is, what's the best thing about the opposite gender? And there are a lot of opposite genders in here. Your book starts with an opposite gender. So
well,
we'll go there first, and then we'll jump into the first opposite gender small role in the book.
well, I have a confession if you're going to bring that up is that I didn't expect anyone to sit there and count of the 100, how many men, how many women, but it is tipped toward my opposite gender. Can't remember exactly, but it's not like 52 and 48. It's more than that. So the ladies have won.
So little did I know. So the first opposite gender uh, is Elsa Lanchester, the Bride of Frankenstein. As you started to write this book, did you think that you were going to start out with her, or did you shuffle them up as you went along?
Well, I knew I wanted to do 100 so I could span the decades and start in the 30s and end in 2019, which is when I started writing. And I also knew that it should start with a big one because there's a lot of famous movies in the book, but there are some actors who aren't household names. So I thought you can't really start the book with someone like John Ray or a movie like Black Hand. It's got to be a big one. And everybody in the world knows Bride of Frankenstein. And even if you can't remember Elsa Lanchester's name, the image is iconic. So I thought that's the way to start. And then I would just continue from there. So there's probably people I could have used from 1932, 33, 34, say, but I just decided she had to be first, and that was it. Although I will say I didn't write that piece first. I don't usually write stuff in order. When you're doing a big chronological piece and they're freestanding essays, you can write them in any order you want as long as they're placed in the right spot. So I usually, especially with the first piece in a book, I never want to do it first because I'm not even really sure what I'm doing when I start. So about halfway through the process, I feel ready to do the first one, but I always end by writing the last one.
So you just said the operative word for my next question, and that word was process. What was your process, or what is your process for writing this book?
Well, once I had the idea, I made a list from memory because I thought the surest way to get in the book were the performances that made such an impression that I could just think about them without even looking at anything. And so I made a list of, I think it was over 300 ideas. And then I just started looking at them. Often they were crossed right off when I found out they were 15 minutes long and they just didn't apply. Or sometimes someone was good, but I thought, well, that was nice, but there's really nothing to say about it beyond that was nice. And so they would just sort of speak to you I would feel something that said to me, oh, I can't wait to say this about that. And that's kind of how it happened.
So did you just when you were putting this together, you had I guess your list of 100 roles that you were going to focus on, and how much time did you spend going back and watching these films? And I'm sure that there were certain films that you probably watched over more than once.
Yeah, I mean, everything in the book, they were all movies I'd seen before, whether it was one time, two times, or 20 times. But I knew I had to watch them again in their entirety before I did anything. So if it was Bride of Frankenstein, the first thing I did was watch Bride of Frankenstein, because one of the things you have to talk about is how this role fits into the whole movie and what is its impact on the whole movie. So once you get your impression of the whole picture, then I would go back and just watch the scenes the person was in rather intensely, and checking the details so I could describe it properly. And then I would go off and write a first draft of that piece, of course, as you said, including biographical material, the other roles on either side of this role, where it lands in their lives and all of that. And then I would go back when I was sort of done and look at the scenes again, because sometimes you think, maybe I had such a good time writing, I was making stuff up. So you always have to go back and say, oh, yeah, that's a detail that I got off. And then, so I make sure I'm accurate and then go through it a couple more times. The longer the process goes on, the more you get in a groove where you know exactly how long it takes to do a piece, since they're all basically the same length. So I think it was 4 days, and then it's the first draft, and you move on to the next one. Of course, I read them hundreds of times in the 2 years before it was published, but
Where did this love of the movies really begin for you?
Well, that little boy that you saw, nobody in my family was in show business in any way,
But
but
you grew up in Queens.
I grew up in Queens and Long Island, in Smithtown, Long Island. I was born in Brooklyn,
Mhm.
but most of my family were movie lovers, movie goers. And so in particular, both my parents and my maternal grandfather and my paternal grandmother specifically as well. So from 4 different sources of people saying, you should sit down and watch this. I did, and I enjoyed them, and I got interested, and I wanted to act and perform, and had that phase of my life to get almost back to the beginning. But in terms of actual movie going, I do remember at 3 years old seeing Mary Poppins,
Mhm.
which you probably do too, as you said.
You and I aren't we the same age, I think?
I just turned 61 last week.
Well, happy birthday. I'm turning 61 this week.
Oh, almost exactly. Okay. Well,
So
then you remember.
we're really on the same trajectory
Yeah.
here.
Well,
So
we were 3 years old when Mary Poppins came out, and I do remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember asking my parents to take me back at least once, maybe twice, and that album. And then of course the next year for us was The Sound of Music, and so
that's right.
our generation thought Julie Andrews was in everything.
That's right. But the other thing is that what I love about our generation is, thank God Disney did something. All of his films were being re-released every 7 years,
Yeah.
and before VCRs and everything. And you and I also, let's talk about one of our, I think maybe I could say our, maybe not, Wizard of Oz.
Sure.
What was
Sure.
that experience like in your household?
Oh, that was always, well, that first of all, that wonderful thing of knowing every child in America was watching it at the same time, and you went to school the next day, you could all talk about it. But I remember loving it so much that every time there was a commercial, I would run into the kitchen to look at the clock, weeping almost that it was only a half hour left or 15 minutes left. It was like, no, it's going by too fast, that kind of thing. But yeah, that was a
I
ritual.
remember getting the TV guide, and if you remember, in the back of the TV guide was a yellow page. Do you remember this?
Yellow
And
page.
in the yellow page, it had a listing of things. Army Archerd used
Oh,
to do
yes,
that, and
I
it had
do.
this is how I remember,
Yeah.
and it had a list of upcoming things throughout the year, and
Yeah.
it would list when the Wizard of Oz was scheduled again. So I would mark this down so that I would not forget that was coming up. I was obsessed with that film. But do you remember the first time that your parents allowed you to go to the movies by yourself? And do you remember what that film was?
Um, when we lived in Smithtown, there was a movie theater across a big avenue, but we could walk to it. And I'm trying to think. I'm sure we were dropped off at certain things that were more kid friendly, but the one that jumps to mind, and again, you'll appreciate this, was when we were 13 and That's Entertainment came out.
Oh,
I made them drive me to the city to see it at the Ziegfeld. But then it came to our local theater, and I saw it 13 times that summer because it was there the whole summer. And we used to go, they would drop, my parents would, I guess my mom, because my dad was working, would drop us off with other friends, my sister, my brother, and we would stay for 3 showings in a row. And so that's how, there was a time I could almost do the whole movie for you.
well, you had a luxury that I did not have. I grew up in a small town where the films would come in and they would have like 3 days and then they would be moved. So when I kept waiting for That's Entertainment to come. And the funny thing is that when I went to see That's Entertainment, I thought I was the only person in the movie theater. And they had changed the marquee for the next film that was coming in, which was Jaws. And 2 girls that I went to school with, Terry Kersey and her sister, came to the movies thinking they were coming to see Jaws. And I remember I'm sitting up front crying. And I remember hearing Terry Kersey go, "Is that Ricky Skipper up there watching this movie?" So, because I was there by myself in the theater with the popcorn, so excited to see this film. But then there was also television and all these iconic films that you and I both love being shown on television for the first time.
Well, I do remember, I think we were 15 when Gone with the Wind was on broadcast television.
In 2 parts.
But where we had it not so good was all those years of watching these movies we love with commercials and panned and scanned and cut to shreds. I must have seen Singing in the Rain 10 times before I actually saw about a third of it that they never showed. And so seeing that for the first time in its entirety was a revelation.
But as you're growing up watching these films and you've got this love for the films, when did the writing begin?
The writing didn't begin till I was 35 because I was trying to be a stage actor in New York. And I think on my 35th birthday, I woke up and said, I don't think it's going to happen. And what else can I do? And I really thought, well, what else has always been a part of me? My love of film. And my first book is a quiz book. So that was my kind of way in, where there's a little writing, but you wouldn't call it writing. It's little headings. And it came out pretty well. I was happy with it. It got published pretty easily compared to what my acting career had been like. So suddenly I felt lucky. But that gave me the confidence to do the next one. And I think each one has been sort of a challenge to, on the writing side of things, to push myself and feel more confident. It's very much like, for me anyway, it's very much like performing. When I'm writing, I want you to read it the way I'm inflecting the line as I write it. I want to get a laugh every once in a while. I want to pierce your heart if it's possible in certain places. So I feel like I approach it the same way I approached acting. So it was not a difficult transition like, oh, I gave up my dreams. No, it's still my dreams. It's just coming out in a different way.
But as you're progressing, as I said earlier, and thank you, your 7th book is here in my hand. But has it gotten easier, or is it harder? Or I'm sure that you go into a zone as you're writing a book. Where are you as far as your emotional state as each book progresses?
Well, I think I know I've gotten better and better as a writer with each book. I'm more confident in what I'm doing, and think of myself as a writer, So on that regard, I think always the difficult thing is, it's like anything. It's like writing a musical or writing. It's the commitment, like to know you've zeroed in on an idea you can live with for that long. And usually I mean, I've never abandoned one yet. So I usually wait till I'm really sure it can be a book. And I usually have the whole thing laid out in my head. I can see the book. I can see where the pictures go. I can see how many pages each chapter is before I've written a word. It's kind of like the Alfred Hitchcock way of directing a movie. The whole thing is here. And then it's really about knowing, then it's just the doing of it. It's like it's already outlined. You figured it out. And so you're not kind of just writing and hoping it turns into something.
Now, I want to go back. You mentioned 1974. Something else happened in 74 with around the time of That's Entertainment. And that was this nostalgia craze that swept the country.
Yeah.
And all these biographies came out, movie books came out. I mean, I was collecting books, and thank God my mom and dad indulged me with
Yeah.
all these books that I was getting
Me too.
on Hollywood and the movies and everything. And so you were right there in the crux of this. All these movie stars from MGM and everything, they were on talk shows,
Yeah.
TV shows. They were in our homes. Thank God for those TV shows that we were able to see them. They were there in our homes quite often. Is it easy to sell these books in today's world?
Well, I know what you're saying in the sense that I do think the 70s that was the golden age of the movie book. And I was collecting them all, the films of you know who, and that one, it was everybody, all those books. And so I guess that was the period when film suddenly became something to study, you know, in schools, and, you know, it became an art form that people were recognizing as such and not just entertainment. I think as time goes on, since I've been doing this for 23 years now, I am conscious of the fact that how many people want to read about movies of the 30s and 40s. So this one goes up to 2019, but it starts in 1935. So if my heart is really in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, I can, you know, indulge that, but continue the story and take it. So people who are more interested in the last 25 or 30 years, it's all in this book too. But it doesn't mean I have to cut off sort of my first love.
Now, I have to ask you, why Milford, Pennsylvania? How did that move happen? And I want to talk about how this fortuitous thing happened for you when you moved there, with you being asked to interview a very well-known actor. I did my research, and you got a chance to interview this great actor on stage, and that began a whole new career for you in that direction.
Well, I was one of those people that if you'd met me at age 30, I would have said, I will never leave Manhattan. It's impossible. Never, never, never. And then my husband at the time, we weren't yet legally married at the time, but he was teaching in Ithaca College, Earl, and he was retiring and didn't want to move into my one-bedroom apartment. He had good friends in Milford, Pennsylvania, which is only 90 minutes from Manhattan. And so he said, I think that's where I'm going to go. And I said, well, I'll go half and half, back and forth. I wasn't expecting to fall in love with small town living and this place in particular. But for now, it'll be 10 years this year that I've been full time here. He has since passed away. I have someone new in my life right now. But it never occurred to me to leave. I love where I am.
So was it Farley Granger that you were asked? Yes.
We have the Black Bear Film Festival.
Yes.
Had started, I believe, a year or two before I moved here. So here I am. I'm a guy. I was writing the second book when this was happening, you know, like 2000, 2001. And I find out there's a film festival at the local movie theater, which I can walk to. And I would do a couple of events there, little film seminars with film clips based on my two books. But then they got Farley Granger to come as a guest because he had a weekend place with his partner, Bob. They convinced him to come. And as the story goes, the board was so excited he agreed to come, and they're going to And then they looked around at each other and thought, well, what do we do with him? He's coming. And somebody said, there's that guy in town who writes books about old movies. I bet he could do something. So I was thrilled. And we did like probably a 45-minute onstage interview. And then we showed Strangers on a Train. And that, as you said, began a series. It was in the book, a series of stars that have come through that I've interviewed on that stage, which is the place where I'm now introducing the movies. But after Farley was Arlene Dahl and Marge Champion and Jane Powell, Keir DeLay, Tab Hunter, Jane Alexander, and Lorna Luft. I think I got them all.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Arlene Dahl was a neighbor. So very lucky to have her. Yes. And Marge Champion became a very good friend. I have to send you my 50th birthday. Yeah. Marge Champion and I dancing together. One of the highlights of my life. And I saw Marge on just when she was 100. Yeah. After Carol passed away, I went out to see her. And I will share with you after the show what she said to me, which was very, very funny. I don't want to offend anyone, but it was political. So, what did you learn about yourself from interviewing these great celebrities? Because I consider it a gift that I get the chance to interview. And I always see what I can learn about myself. Even from, interviewing anyone, I want to know what I can learn about myself from every interview.
Well, I don't know if I've ever thought of it in those terms, but what I always loved about the sort of the intimacy, even though you're in a crowded theater with an audience, is that, I do my homework. I know this stuff. And when you're happy and excited about something, it's not work. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I'd say every time there was always a moment in the interviews where I could see the look in their eyes that's like, hey, you're good at this. And I'm having a good time, and take me wherever you want to take me. And I guess what was so great was to feel like often these were people I idolized, and to feel that they looked at me like, hey, you're sort of one of us at what you do. And the other really special thing was when they would share something beyond what I thought they would share, something that was personal about being lonely at the studio. It's just something that you could feel the audience get real quiet. Like, this is really special that something's happening. And so I for each and every one of them, there's a moment or two where I feel there was some special thing, some advice they gave me after the show when we were talking in the bar kind of thing. And or just questions I was able to ask that you could never rely on from a book, that I would read about you and they said this and this, and I've been dying to ask this question, and now you're here and you're going to tell me. And there were a couple of moments like that. Like when I told Jane Powell that we showed a series of the dances from Royal Wedding, except I left my hat in Haiti. And we were alone in the elevator, and I said, you noticed I didn't include that. And I'm not going to say what I'm about to say because I want to insult you. I just want to hear your opinion. I didn't include it because, as great as you and Fred Astaire are, I always thought that number was horrible and stupid. And what was it? And she said, wasn't it awful? And it was like, how else would I know that Jane Powell agreed with me unless I asked her? So she was charming about the whole thing. She goes, I know.
It's very interesting when someone is able to open up with you about, I mean, she really, I was surprised I don't know how open she was in her interview with you, but she, especially because of the timing of her arrival in Hollywood, how unhappy she was.
She talked about not really having many friends, about going through puberty with no one to talk to. Yeah, that kind of thing. Another thing so impressive about that generation of star was the discipline of even just being up there for the weekend. You're thinking divas, they're going to keep us waiting. Anytime I would say, well, I'll come pick you up in the lobby of your hotel at 5:45, thinking they would come. Often they were there before me or right at the same time. It was like they were trained. If you say you're doing something, you do it, and you're a pro. And if you're going to be the star for the weekend, you're going to expect everyone to expect a star and that they're going to want to talk to you and you'll be available. Every one of them was kind of a dream in that way. Like, we know how to do this.
Well, let's get back to the book for a moment. And I want to ask you, out of these 100 incredible roles, was there anything that you learned that you did not? I mean, obviously, you do a lot of research going into this that really surprised you, that you did not know going into this book, that really was like a curveball that came at you?
Well,
Without
I
giving
think,
away anything, because we want people to buy the book.
right. Well, I think in generally, I think sometimes I knew these parts were easily under 10 minutes, but sometimes I was shocked at how little, that Marilyn Monroe in All About Eve adds up to 3 minutes. I mean, the movie's over 2 hours and everyone remembers her, well, mostly because she became a star later, but her impact, 3 minutes, or that Thelma Ritter's film debut in Miracle on 34th Street, is 2 minutes. And sometimes I was astonished at the impact these people made. Yes, the roles were often very well written, however small they were, but 2 minutes is a short time on the screen. And there's quite a number of them that I was in shock at just how little the time was.
I want to talk about a few iconic roles, movies, and I wanted to focus on a few. It is Black History Month, and there are a few that I wanted to just pull, and go with what pops into your head and your memories. I'll start with Lena Horne, Till the Clouds Roll By. As someone who grew up in the South, it pains me to even know that her moments were cut from her. A lot of her numbers were cut from her films when they were shown in the South. But that moment in Till the Clouds Roll By, Showboat.
Yeah.
Your overall thoughts?
Well, she's only in the movie for 5 minutes. The movie, The Life of Jerome Kern, for those who haven't seen it. And the movie opens with opening night of Showboat, his biggest success. And so we see basically a montage of some of the great songs. And Lena Horne plays Julie Laverne and sings Can't Help Lovin' That Man. And then she shows up at the end for the finale as herself. But even with 2 scenes, it doesn't add up to more than 5 minutes. But here she is playing a role that she seemed born to play, and she's the right age. And it seems like everything is working out beautifully. There's Katherine Grayson in the movie as Magnolia. 5 years later, MGM makes Showboat again. Katherine Grayson comes along, gets to play the role, but Lena Horne is not asked to play the role. It's almost like they're screen testing, and there was that thing of, that fact that she was really Black. And so you had to cast someone that wasn't, who could play. But she shows how perfect she was when she sings Can't Help Lovin' That Man Until the Clouds Roll By. It's beautiful. It just is it's like a hint of what could have been. And I just love it because, at least we have that. It's the only performance in the book that's entirely sung. She never says anything, speaks a line of dialogue, but it makes an impact. And I thought, what a great way to pay tribute, in this case, not only to what she does in the movie, to what she didn't get to do. So that was kind of a tribute to What If,
And how she owned it years later when she did The Lady and Her Music on Broadway. And I'm just gonna say a phrase, and I know that you're gonna know what film I'm talking about. Slap heard around the world.
Yes, I do know that one. That is In the Heat of the Night, 1967, when Larry Gates, who is in the book for this movie, he plays the wealthy Southern racist. And when the detective Sidney Poitier dares to suggest he may be a suspect, he slaps Sidney, who immediately, without a thought, slaps him right back, to his utter horror and shock. And Mr. Gates is only in the movie that in that one scene for 4 minutes, but it's probably the most memorable scene in the movie. And what I love about his performance is that after Sidney Poitier and Rod Steiger and the servant all leave, you think he's going to fume and start throwing the orchids around the greenhouse or make an angry phone call. He cries. It's self-pity. His reaction to what happened is self-pity. It's the end of an era. And I thought, what a brilliant choice. Maybe he was directed to do so, but it's so much more powerful than the obvious thing of ranting and raving.
I mentioned in my introduction, when I won the TCM backlot contest,
Yeah.
and I went out to introduce Jezebel,
Yeah.
on the other side of the street on the red carpet was Lee Grant and Sidney Poitier.
Oh.
Across the way, they were showing In the Heat of the Night. And of course, I was being pulled in one direction.
Right.
I was going, and they were going in this direction. I was going, let me over there. I couldn't go. Because Sidney Poitier is one of my idols in film. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner is one of those films that every time, my husband Danny, he goes, no, you're not watching this film again. And they showed it as Fandango, recently,
Oh, yeah.
before the pandemic. And I went to see it again in the movies.
Yeah.
And the moment that film starts, I start weeping.
Yeah.
And to me, it just grabs me every time. And it's just one of my all-time favorite films. I want to talk about another one of my favorite actresses, who you mentioned in the book, but not for the film that she won the Academy Award for. And that's Hattie McDaniel.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's for the Bette Davis movie In This Our Life from 1942. Because she's already won the Academy Award for Mammy and Gone with the Wind, of course, but there are no opportunities for her really. And so she's essentially playing the same kinds of roles she played before Mammy, except after Mammy, now everyone knows who she is. That's Mammy from Gone with the Wind, but the roles don't really get any better. In this movie, In This Our Life, she's only in it for 2.5 minutes, and she's got 3 scenes, and only one of the scenes is good, but the scene is so good. And she is playing a servant again, in which she's doing her duties in those first 2 scenes. But the third scene, she's just a mother who's worried about her wrongly accused son and how the cops are going to treat him. And she's talking to Olivia de Havilland, coincidentally, Melanie from Gone with the Wind, in which she had her greatest scene going up the stairs, telling about what happened with Scarlett and Rhett when the little girl died. So she has this beautiful, deeply felt, very simply played scene about how worried she is. And you think this is probably the only really good moment she got after winning the Academy Award, because she was so often used to be funny, and she was funny.
Mm-hmm.
But this really showed, oh yeah, that woman who really could act. And here she gets to show so briefly just how good she was.
But when you think about this woman being the first African-American to win an Academy Award, not being able to go to the Academy Awards and sit with everyone else,
Right.
She was in the separate holding area until she accepted the award.
Right.
Not being able to go to the premiere.
Yeah.
And then winning the Academy Award.
Yeah.
You would think that doors would open. And, even Rita Moreno talking about
Sure.
how doors did not open for her after West Side Story. Carol Channing used to say, be careful what you wish for, because you will surely get it. You think that doors will open for you, and it's not the case at all.
Sure.
So sad.
Well, she's another person for that reason. It was wonderful to include her and write a chapter about her, just to say part of what I just said about the untapped potential of people who have shown us how good they could be, but not nearly as much as they should have been able to.
And but I want to talk about a couple of my favorite character actors, and and then you can go off and talk about the careers they had or did not have. No big careers that went beyond that. And I was surprised, things that I learned in your book. to learn about other aspects of their career. Una Munson, one of my favorite. I love her in Gone with the Wind.
Belle Watling, yes. Again, something like 6.5 minutes, and every moment is gold. Yeah. Well, she had the musical comedy career on Broadway, and you think, really? I know. I don't see it, but yeah, it's funny the things people did before and after these moments that we remember them for. And probably as talented as she was, if she hadn't done Gone with the Wind, most of us would have no idea who we were talking about, including us.
Marjorie Main.
Marjorie Main. Well, she's in the book for the women. And as I say in the book, I could have used any one of 50 women in that movie who were in it for less than 10 minutes, almost all of them, except the half dozen leads. And as I was watching it again, I guess in its entirety to see who was going to stand out, everybody's so great, but no one is like Marjorie Main. So when she comes up well past the halfway mark, you're thinking, we've seen a lot of women, but we haven't seen this one. So that's why I chose her.
Agnes Moorehead.
Agnes Moorehead. Again, a career filled with opportunities to be in this book. But the Grace Kelly movie, The Swan, is a movie I've always loved. And the role is that Agnes Moorehead plays is so perfect for this book because she's only in the last 10 minutes. She sails in as the queen and sort of gets everything in order. Actually, she doesn't really even know what's going on, but she sails in very grand, and she has a fabulous costume, and everyone's afraid of her. And her line readings are so crisp and commanding, and it's sort of like everything you want Agnes Moorehead to be.
Alice Pierce.
Alice Pierce, and someone who died far too young while she was on Bewitched. She recreates her Broadway role in On the Town in the film version, which is why she's in the book. About 10 minutes altogether as Lucy Schmealer. Gene Kelly's fill-in date, and she's so sweet and adorable. And she has that, even though she's a broadly funny character, she has that sweet, sweet moment when he kisses her goodnight, and she's so touched, and she's so human. She's not a joke at all, but she's very funny.
Now, I want to go back again to talk about your process. When you're writing the book, how much time did you spend on each of these various actors and actresses? Did you write the chapters and then come back, or what was the process like as far as the time devoted to each one?
Well, I guess, like I said, first watch the whole movie, take notes during it, then take notes during just the scenes, then going through whatever my own books online to accumulate the biographical stuff, the credits, the before and the after in terms of their career with regard to the movie I was writing about. But I don't write anything till I've got all of it. And then I'll sit down and do a rough draft, figure out what's my first sentence. That's always a big thing. Like, what's my way in? Is it the movie itself? Is it something way before that? And usually it's just some idea. It's like, that's the way in. Same thing with like, what's the last line of each piece? Like, what's the way out? And so, like I said, about 4 days or so, I would have a rough draft and then go back to the movie and then read it over and over again. The way I would stop and move on is if I could read a rough draft without changing something, I would put it away. Didn't mean I wouldn't change more in the months to come. But when you're at the beginning of it, when you're reading it, you're changing so many things. The paper's all messed up with marks. And then the next time there are fewer, and the next time fewer. So then if you could read it once and not change it, you got to keep going, or you'll never make any progress.
Did the shape of the book change at all as you were writing it?
I think I just sort of, I think the first one I wrote was Dame May Whitty in Lassie Come Home. And it sort of set the tone. But I think as I went from there, it became more set in terms of this happens, then this. So the structure of the piece got a little more uniform as I went on. So if you go back and read that one, it might seem a little less, in the groove. But as I said, I had so many times to go back that I'm sure I changed a lot in the year or two when I went back and read those to make it take a little rough edges if I thought there were any.
Now, you said you're working on 2 more projects.
I have 2 ideas that I haven't started writing a new one yet. Actually, the one before this came out in 2017, and I didn't have an idea for 2 years. So it's not uncommon for me to take that long. However, this comes out in 2 weeks, and I think I know what I'm going to do next. But again, I'm trying to visualize it. And so when I've got the picture of what it would look like and how many chapters, how long each one is, once I get that all sorted out.
How long did you say this took you?
I guess this one, because the pieces are fairly short and the performances are short, I think the main body of it took maybe 13 months or maybe 14 months. Others have taken 2 years. But like I said, the nature of the beast meant it would be shorter.
So out of the 100, which one took you the longest to write?
Oh my goodness. I didn't hit any snag where I thought I'm stuck, I'm having writer's block or anything, because the moment with that is the moment of whether you're going to do that one or not. There were times I would watch something and say, I don't know, and I'd leave it alone, watch the movie again in 2 or 3 weeks, and then say, yes. If I couldn't shake it for 3 weeks, it's telling me it wants to be in the book. So that was the only indecision about, and especially once I got to like number 90, there were only 10 slots left, then you're much more aware of, are there enough from the 80s, that kind of thing, to make sure it has the feeling of the whole 85 years of chronology.
Were there any that landed on the cutting room floor?
No, and I have to say I'm lucky, because when I finished this over a year ago, I haven't stumbled on anything where I'm kicking myself that it should have been in there and why didn't I think of it, or it's going to happen because it has to happen, but it hasn't. Anything that's occurred to me were ones I had already dismissed for whatever reason. So, but it will happen.
So I want to tell everyone, the book there are no small parts. The book is incredible. I mean, the fun part about this is you don't have to read it chronologically. I didn't.
No.
I went through, and went through and picked up my favorites, then went back and read the others, and then I went back and read it from cover to cover. I did. It is such a fun book. It is coming out on the 22nd. You can get it on Amazon. But what I would prefer that you all do is call your favorite bookseller and ask if they have it on their list. And if they don't, ask for it. And that way we get it into more stores.
Sure.
That's the way to do it. And then we're going to give away a book in a few moments. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do this. I am going to bring this on. We're going to do the giveaway. And let's see here. I think this is, did I do this right? We're going to find out in a few moments. Let's see. I think this is the right page. Yes. And we're going to play a little game here. This is my homage to James Lipton inside the Actors Studio. I've got a list of questions I'm going to ask you. And then at the end of this, everybody who's left a comment will automatically be entered in the drawing. So I think that all they need to do is let me make sure that I've done this the right way. And I hope that I've done this the right way. We're going to start collecting comments. We have, and there we are. So the first question is, who do you greatly admire in this business and why?
Well, they don't have to be alive, do they?
They don't.
Yeah, I always say that Fred Astaire was my favorite person of the 20th century. He was always my idol. And when I was 15, I did get to meet him briefly and get his autograph, and he was totally charming. But I worship at the altar of Fred Astaire.
That's wonderful. And I'm curious, how did you meet him?
I got my parents to take me to the premiere of That's Entertainment Part 2 at the Ziegfeld when I was 15. And I stood at the top of the escalator at the Ziegfeld Theater, and everyone had to go right past me. And since I was basically a kid, nobody thought it was strange. They thought it was kind of cute, I guess. And so that's how I ended up meeting several of the people I interviewed many years later, like Marge Champion and Arlene Dahl, too.
Great. I'm going to send you the clip if you're interested.
Yeah, of course.
Dancing together. What is the best physical thing that you have ever done for another person in this business?
I'm not sure I know where to go with that. Physical thing?
Like take someone in the business that you took to dinner, you picked them up, something that you did for someone in the business.
Well, I guess it would have to be something tied to what the stories I told you with the Black Bear Film Festival about some of being their sort of caretaker for the weekend. All those people I mentioned, making sure they went from place to place and checking on their room and then dinner and all those things, and feeling, they needed me for the weekend. So I do remember feeling especially that way with Jane Powell, because she spent a little more time here than some of them. Not that she was in any way needing help to get around or anything, just that she was, I just felt I was there for her. And especially when fans were getting a little unruly sometimes outside, not that they were unkind, but just that they wanted to get close. And it was like, I felt, yes, I did sort of take care of her. So I guess that would be my answer.
Okay. What one person most affected the choices that you've made in your profession as a writer, let's say as a writer?
Well, I'll say the person who jumps to mind is the person I always felt gave me permission to do this. And you may remember him. His name is Jerry Vermiglia, and he wrote a lot of those books that we bought when we were teenagers. Mm-hmm. And I got to meet, we were in the same theater company in the 90s, and he was working at TV Guide, and he invited me up to the place. And I told him I was working on quizzes that I hoped I could get them in Premiere Magazine. That's as big as I was able to dream. And he said, why don't you make it a book? And I bust out laughing in his face. But that was a key moment because he made me realize that I could do it just like he did it. And so I always think of Jerry as the guy who gave me permission to change careers.
Wow. Well, thank you, Jerry. That's great.
Yeah.
Who have you compared yourself to in this industry? And why?
Well, I wouldn't compare myself, but I know who I've admired the most. And I got to know her very well, too, was Pauline Kael.
Wow.
I used to read her voraciously, and I didn't get to know her till she was in retirement. But we had at first a pen pal relationship, but mostly through phone calls. But then I would go up and visit her, too. And she gave me a blurb for my quiz book. And I'm sorry to say that by the time the second book came out, which was the first one with actual criticism and actual writing, she had already passed away. So she never really got to read me. But she was an enormous influence. And I think not so much in people's opinions and judgments. The thing I always attribute to Pauline was that sort of, again, giving, like what Jerry kind of did, the freedom to say what you feel, just sort of unguarded. Like, what did I think? Just say it out loud and then write it down. And I think she just had that beautiful freedom that wasn't really affected by anything else around her. And I think I always aspire to that, like clear out my head. And it's like, just about what I think and my relationship to what I'm writing about.
That's great. I just want to let everybody know we are going to be giving away a book. And even if you put in hashtag no small parts, everybody who leaves a comment will be eligible to possibly win a copy of the book. Who is the collaborator that you most often agree with in this business?
You mean another critic?
Critic, writer, anyone that you've worked with.
Oh goodness. I don't I always think of well, it's a sort of the answer. My late husband Earl was the person who read everything I wrote first. I mean, he
Mm,
would be the only person who read them until they left they went out into the world of agents, publishers, blah, 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 blah. And so he was always my collaborator. And since his background was theater and he had been an English teacher as well, he was kind of like my guide as a writer, because I could ask him anything about the English language and, of course, grammar and all that. So when he passed away, it'll be 2 years.
wow.
I felt like one of the things for me as a writer was that I had absorbed everything he had taught me for the 20 years before. And so I no longer felt the need to hand it over to him, because everything he had to say was with me by then. But he
Wow.
was the key person, sure.
Wow. That's wonderful. Um, Out of all the people that you have ever interviewed, and I'm asking, these are words because I'm reading a book, and these are words that pop up in the book. Out of all the people that you have interviewed over the years, did anyone ever talk about experiencing jealousy in their profession?
I don't think they actually did. So often, I think people would bring up how lucky they were about landing someplace and that they never thought. Someone like Jane Powell, who was a kid essentially, or
Mhm.
Tab Hunter because of his looks, and people who sort of stumbled into opportunities. What if that role hadn't come along? I don't remember anyone. I always would ask, was there a role that got away that you wanted? And I think often people had an answer for that one, but they didn't really blame anyone. It was usually they were busy doing something else, or so and so wouldn't let them audition. But it was never about the actor who got the part. So no, I don't recall anything like that. Maybe they just didn't want to tell me that
Well,
kind of
I'm glad
story.
to hear that. The next word is resentment. Did
Yeah,
any have any resentments in their careers?
I think you know there's often the people when they talked about the studio system and how controlling that was, but I don't remember any specific horror stories. Just that the being sheltered. Certainly, that was an aspect of it. Being sheltered and not prepared for the world once that time in their life was over, and they still weren't really old. They just were sort of let go and then fend for yourself. So anyone who sort of came through here and they were all, in their 70s or 80s, they were all survivors. So those people all had seen the highs and the lows, and they kind of knew that that's just kind of what it was. They all seemed very at peace with that's the way careers are.
Wow. And maybe you've answered this next question. Maybe it was your husband, maybe someone else, I don't know. Who is the person throughout your career who has been the most sensitive to your personal needs in your career, on your career path?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it certainly would have been Earl, because he was always the cheerleader for any break I got, any good review or some opportunity. I had the night at Turner Classic Movies devoted a night to one of my books when Robert Osborne introduced 5 movies from my book Screensavers, and kept holding it up and talking about me. And so he was there through that, but he was there when I was just writing those quizzes and didn't even know I would ever put a book together. So certainly that there, people who've come into it. I would like to mention Jane Alexander, because she was one of the people I interviewed. She also gave me some good advice, just because we got to talking on a personal level about careers and stuff. And then she's in the book For All the President's Men, and she also gave us a big juicy blurb on the back cover.
I'm going to read that blurb if you don't mind.
Of course, I don't mind.
Oh my God. John DiLeo takes us on a captivating waltz. I love that. Through movie history by focusing on actors in brief roles who made a big impact. Many of the 100 movies are well-known classics, others obscure, but DiLeo makes you want to see them all. and revisit the under 10-minute performances he writes about so compellingly. I am delighted to be included for my 8 minutes on screen as the bookkeeper in All the President's Men, and to confess to having never been so thoroughly dissected in a part. Jane Alexander.
She was, in terms of advice, she was someone, after we did our interview together at the festival, and I hadn't started this book yet, and I didn't have an idea, and it was a year since the last one had come out. And I remember she said to me over a drink, "Don't push it. It's going to come, but don't force it." And I didn't. And it took a little longer. And here we are talking about it. So
that's wonderful. And my last question to you is, what is the biggest risk that you've taken in your career?
I think the biggest risk book-wise was my Tennessee Williams book. It's called Tennessee Williams and Company, His Essential Screen Actors. And it's about the 11 actors who appear in more than one of the movies based on the works of Tennessee Williams. And the reason I say that is because it's as much a theater book as it is a film book. So in addition to writing about the performances and the films in the way I usually do, I had to be up on all the plays, on all the actors who played the roles, on all the different interpretations as much as I could find. And so that I could talk about Blanche Dubois as fully as I could. That's a massive subject, and that's just one of the roles. So I think that was sort of the Mount Everest of tasks that I set for myself. And that book's a little different because I said it's very much a theater book as well.
That's wonderful. Let's give away a book, and I'm going to show you how this works. I have nothing to do with the giveaway, but we will draw this here, and you'll see how this is how it works. And Susan Strickland is our winner. So Susan, if you will send me Richard at richardskipper.com. Once again, Richard at richardskipper.com, your email information and your mailing address. We will get this off to you. And I think, John, you will autograph it for Susan.
I will. Absolutely.
And you are in for a treat. It's a great book. I'm going to remove this. Don't go anywhere for a moment, John.
Okay.
I just want to say a few words to everyone who tuned in tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. It means a lot to me that you showed up. If this was your first time here, I hope it will not be your last. Please subscribe to my channel, leave a comment here, and tell your friends. I always say that my goal is to celebrate artists, celebrate art, celebrate John, celebrate the movies, get this book. What I would like all of you to do is to go to your favorite bookseller, and I would like you to order 2 copies of this book. I would like you to order 1 copy for yourself, and then I want you to go to your Facebook friends list, and I want you to go to the 8th name that pops up. Today's the 8th name. And I want you to order a copy for that 8th friend. And I want you to inscribe in the book what they mean to you. And maybe they are in your life for more than 10 minutes. So it's important that they be there for you. I have a dear friend, David Friedman, and he says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And I always say, if you're going to go out in a boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. Last week, I lost 3 very close friends. And after they passed away, all over Facebook, I see this outpouring of love where everybody was saying how much they loved them. They're posting pictures of them. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if that was happening 2 weeks before this? So they could have seen how much we love them. And I think it's important that we start doing that while our friends are around. That's my message for all of you. We've got an abundance right here in our hands, and it's important that we take the time to do that. So that's my message for all of you tonight. Take the time to tell your friends what they mean to you. Check out these great artists that I've celebrated here. Check out not only this book, but there are 6 other books that John has written. check those out as well. John, I am going to leave the screen and I'm going to give you the final word. Anything that you want to say about anything that we talked about tonight that you want to build upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to anyone who's watching right now. I thank you for the gifts that you've given us and the gifts that you will continue to give. And thank you. And I hope that you had a good time.
I did.
And that when the next book comes out, that you will come back here. Or better yet, that I will be in my car and I will be in Milford, Pennsylvania on stage with you doing this, interviewing you there. Can we do that?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. You got the final word. Don't worry about how to end the show. As soon as you say good night, or whatever your sign off is, I will start the closing credits. Have a good night.
Thank you, Richard. I didn't know he was going to do that, but I guess what's been on all our minds is when the world is going to get back to normal. And as we're thinking about travel and seeing relatives more often, it's a weird time for me because right now is a very happy time with, like I was telling you about my movie series and my new relationship and my book coming out. It's a weird time to have so much happy going on while we're still in this sort of state of uncertainty. So I just hope to you and to myself, I can be sort of a source of optimism that there are still a lot of good things going on while we're just all still dealing with this, as the 2 years of it is about to be upon us. So with that, it was really fun for me to be here. So good night all. Thank you.